Taking over Taiwan was a pledge that Chinese Communist Party CCP leader Xi Jinping made to senior party leaders in order to stay in power beyond two terms. But that doesn't seem likely. To change the Chinese constitution and remove the term limit in 2018, some Communist Party insiders told me a year prior that Xi proposed taking over Taiwan within 10 years and using the next decade to stabilize his rule. Hence, he would need a third and even a fourth term to accomplish the goal that even Communist China's founder, Mao Zedong, couldn't achieve. The year 2027 is rapidly approaching, and Donald Trump's second presidency complicates the situation. Former Peking University law professor Yuan Hongbing told me that 2 months before the November U.S. presidential election, the 6-member Chinese Military Commission, chaired by Xi, deployed an ad hoc think tank to forecast the geopolitical climate. Yuan, who now lives in Australia, was Xi's drinking buddy in the 1980s and has maintained high-level connections within the CCP. According to Yuan, the team of top military and foreign affairs scholars predicted a Trump victory and that the president-elect would move quickly to broker ceasefires in the Middle East and Ukraine to redirect military resources and focus on the Indo-Pacific region. The Chinese think tank concluded that there is a now-or-never window of opportunity to invade Taiwan before 2027, and the CCP must prepare for a once-in-a-century decisive battle with the United States in the Taiwan Strait, he added. The Chinese scholars might have given Xi the answer he wanted, because a 2-year opportunity window on Taiwan would rely on crucial factors in the CCP's favor to distract the Trump administration from focusing on the Indo-Pacific, chaos during the transition of power, troubles in the U.S. economy, and serious conflicts between the United States and its allies. But so far, none of these have happened or look like they are about to happen. So far, the transition period has been peaceful. The U.S. Federal Reserve has managed inflation without triggering a recession, a scenario that would have kept Trump preoccupied. In addition, Trump had already begun announcing foreign policies before his inauguration. Last month, under the mediation of the United States and France, Israel and the Iranian-backed Lebanese Hezbollah reached a 60-day ceasefire agreement, subsiding one front of the war in the Middle East. Trump wasn't directly involved but claimed credit on Truth Social by quoting a media report saying the truce agreement was a direct result of his incoming administration. Trump has also demanded the return of hostages taken in the Middle East by his inauguration day on Jan. 20, threatening historic U.S. military action if this does not happen. In Europe, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky have indicated a willingness to work with Trump to end the war between their countries. Xi's window of opportunity is already closing, and he cannot do much to keep it open without changing his approach to Taiwan. Can Xi do that? It is unlikely, because his authority beyond two terms is based on his pledge to seize Taiwan. He cannot afford to change his overall plan and stay in power. Previous communist leaders had more personal clout to change course without losing credibility or power. After telling the Chinese for years that the United States was an imperialist enemy, Mao met with U.S. President Richard Nixon. Deng Xiaoping welcomed Western capital after Mao kicked evil capitalism out of China. Xi wouldn't have much leeway, especially when he currently faces a power crisis caused by the downfall of another confidant, Miao Zedong, a member of the Central Military Commission (CMC). Since Xi took power, 7 members of the prestigious military decision-making body have been sacked. Among the communist cadres, Mao's case is no longer viewed as isolated but as part of a pattern in which Xi no longer holds absolute control over the Chinese military. Last month, on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in Peru, Xi told President Joe Biden about his red lines or absolute no-goes, including the Taiwan issue or, in the party's words, U.S. support for Taiwan's independence from mainland China. However, from the perspective of Sun Tzu, the great military strategist in ancient China, the more red lines one states, the more weaknesses one reveals because the enemy would know one's bottom line in negotiations and buttons to push. In the case of Taiwan, the United States already knows the geographic parameters of the potential war and Xi's rough timing. This limits the CCP's ability to seize Taiwan by surprise, making its occupation of the self-governed island an afterthought. Yet Xi has no flexibility to change his strategy, and time is not on his side. The dark side of the Chinese investments and loans to Sri Lanka. China's investments and loans to Sri Lanka have turned the island nation into a modern-day semi-colony, placing the future of its economy in the hands of Beijing's state-owned contractors and bankers and the International Monetary Fund. Sri Lanka's close relations with China, which brought the country into this dire situation, began in 2007 when Beijing provided President Mahinda Rajapaksa with military and diplomatic assistance to fight the Tamil Tigers. Over time, the two countries has become closer thanks to high-profile Chinese investments in Sri Lanka's construction projects, including the deep-sea Hambantota Port Project, the Colombo Port City Complex, and the Matala Rajapaksa International Airport (MRIA). In theory, building infrastructure is something developing countries such as Sri Lanka need to do to develop a market economy, stimulate economic growth, and turn into a regional trade hub. However, that isn't how China's infrastructure investments in the small island nation worked in practice. Building these projects initially stimulated economic growth through the multiplier effect. Sri Lanka's GDP growth jumped from low single digits in 2009 to 16.12% in 2012. But it has been mostly heading south for the rest of the decade. There is a good explanation for this pattern. All three major infrastructure projects were pursued with political rather than economic criteria, serving Beijing's interests in expanding its presence in the Indian Ocean and encircling India, rather than the interests of the local economy. As a result, Chinese investments failed to have an accelerator effect that stimulated economic growth by building sustainable infrastructure projects. Some projects aren't economically viable, as they don't serve a large enough market to justify the resources allocated to them, such as MRI Airport. As a result, they end up wasting the country's precious resources. Other projects are economically viable but built at excessively high costs by Chinese state construction firms instead of private contractors through transparent, competitive bidding. In addition, Chinese investments turned into debt traps, as they were financed by loans from Chinese state-owned banks at high interest rates and without transparency, leaving Sri Lanka heavily indebted to Beijing. Sri Lanka's government debt stood at 103% of GDP in 2023, with a growing portion owed to China. In addition, Sri Lanka's government budget deficits are running at 10.51% of its GDP, adding to its indebtedness. The country's growing debt came when Sri Lanka was already living beyond its means, as evidenced by persistent fiscal and current account deficits. To cope with rising debt to China, Sri Lanka has signed agreements with China that swap loans for equity, transforming China into an owner of significant infrastructure projects like Sri Lanka's principal port and a key outpost in the Indian Ocean for Beijing. In 2016, a Chinese state-owned company purchased the asset of the Hambantota port, generating concerns about sovereignty in Sri Lanka and Chinese naval ambitions in Delhi and Washington, D.C., write Meg Rithmeyer and Yi Haoli in a Harvard Business School research paper. This case explores the dynamics of China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, a large-scale infrastructure and connectivity project launched under its powerful leader, Xi Jinping, as well as the politics and economics of sovereign borrowing in the age of Chinese lending. Still, these agreements weren't enough to save the country from seeking debt relief from the International Monetary Fund (IMF). In March 2023, the Washington-based institution notorious for its stringent loan terms and conditions cleared a $2.9 billion loan to ease its balance of payments crisis. This crisis made importing essential products like food, fuel, and medicine difficult, causing social unrest. But the loan came with strings attached, like dictating the future course of the country's economic policy. Maintaining macroeconomic stability and restoring debt sustainability are key to securing Sri Lanka's prosperity and require persevering with responsible fiscal policy, said the IMF in a transcript defining the terms and conditions of the loan. Continued revenue mobilization efforts and spending restraint are needed to prepare the 2025 budget in line with program parameters. China's investments are supposed to help Sri Lanka grow and develop. Instead, they have pushed the Sri Lankan economy into a perfect storm, putting it in a position no country wants to be in, counting on the IMF and China for its survival.